Grab your royal icing and hang on to your gold, or we're going to bring these leprechaun cookies to life today. I'm Leslie from Leslie's Cookies and Treats, and welcome to the channel. If you like cookie decorating, you're in the right place. So grabbing my black royal icing in about a 15-second consistency, I'm just going to pipe a line here for the sole of his shoe. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. This sitting gnome cookie cutter is available on my website for 3D printing, and if you've followed my channel for a while, you'll know that this sitting gnome cookie cutter is so versatile, and he comes out for every season, so be sure to check that out. And there's a playlist for all the different designs I've come up with, and I'd love to see what you come up with too. So if you make this gnome, be sure to tag me on social media at L__treats. Now I'm going to move over to the pants, and I've just got a gray royal icing here, and I'm just going to outline and flood in the area where his pants will go, leaving some room for the tops of the shoes. I want to let the black royal icing dry before we go ahead and pipe the tops of his shoes so that there will be separation between the layers. If you pipe two different colors of wet royal icing right next to each other, they will become one solid area, so I want to avoid that. So I'm going to let the shoes dry before I add the tops of the shoes. And if you look closely at my green icing here, you see that I have dried icing on the side of my piping bag. That is a big no-no. You want to make sure to wipe that off, because as it dries, it is sure to flake off right onto your cookie, right where you don't want it to. So keep your tools clean, my friends. So my green icing is about a 15-second consistency, and I just piped a little line where the crease of his hat is going to go. Now I'm coming back down to flood in the tops of his shoes. The cookie had been sitting aside and drying for about 15 minutes, so my pants and the soles of the shoes are dry enough so the icing will not run together. I'm just going to pipe in an area here and fill that in, and then I'll use my scribe to settle the icing down and shape it the way I want it. It's very important that you use your scribe or your toothpick to settle these little areas down and make sure that the icing gets all the way down to the cookie. Royal icing has a tendency to kind of sit up on top of whatever you're piping it next to and not sink down to the cookie, and then craters will form as it dries and it does sink. So coming back up to the hat now, I'm just going to outline the rest of the hat, and then we'll flood that in. So I'm taking my time and I'm following my line of icing as it's falling. I've lifted my piping bag up just a little bit while I'm outlining. And now that I'm done, I will go back in and flood it in. I want to be careful not to go over the top of that crease line that we made before. And because my icing is a 15-second consistency, I can flood right up to the edge without worrying that the icing is going to spill over the side of the cookie. If your icing is not quite this thick, you want to leave some space between the outline and your flood, and use your scribe or your toothpick to get the icing all the way to the edge. And you can also move the icing with your scribe or toothpick to get the icing closer to the edge if your outline didn't turn out quite the way you wanted it to. And if you don't have a cookie turntable, I highly recommend that you invest in one. They're not that expensive, and it really helps be able to turn your cookie around so you can see what you're working on without having to touch your cookie and possibly mess it up. So I'm just going to carefully get my icing here up next to this crease line that we piped earlier so that I don't go over the top of it. When the icing dries, this will look like a fold or a wrinkle in his hat, which is exactly what I want. And once you finish with the hat, go ahead and set this cookie aside to dry for another 10 to 15 minutes until the hat has crusted over. And then I'm going to come back in with my black icing and just pipe a big fat band here. This is going to serve as the hat band, but it's also going to add height to the layer of green that I'm going to pipe right over the top of that for the bottom of his hat. And as always, I'm going to use my scribe to make sure that this icing is all the way down to the cookie and that it's shaped the way that I want it to. And then we'll let that dry, and while we wait for that, we can come down here and add the cuffs to the bottom of his pants just by piping a couple of lines of gray icing right in that crease between the shoes and the pants. And I'll use my scribe to settle that icing down and make sure there aren't any air bubbles. And then I set the cookie aside to dry again for another 5 to 10 minutes. And now I'm coming back in with my detail consistency orange icing, and I'm just going to pipe in the beard as a series of lines and squiggles. So I'm not going to flood this section in. I'm just going to make a series of lines and squiggles that will overlap a bit. And I'm going to try not to overlap too much at the very point, because otherwise it'll be really thick but I will come down and make some squiggles here and just kind of fill this in. And because this is a detail consistency icing, it's not going to just all run together, so I can go ahead and pipe right over the top of it while it's wet, and it will dry this way. So just a couple more squiggles, and then I'll set this back aside to dry. And my cookie has been drying for about 15 minutes. Now I'm just going to come back in with my green royal icing, and I'm going to pipe right over the top of that black royal icing that I did earlier so that I can have a raised bottom of the hat so that it looks like it's coming out over the top of the beard. And I'll just outline and flood in a rectangle section. And then once again, I'll use my scribe to shape it, pop any air bubbles, and make sure that that icing gets down to what's underneath it. But I'm going to be careful because I don't want to poke holes in the icing underneath. And we'll let that dry while we come down here and we add an arm on both sides. So just coming down from the point of his shoulder and then making like a little C shape, I'm going to add 2 arms and then use my scribe to settle that icing down and to further shape it the way I want it. And then I'm going to set him aside to dry again. And now that he's had some time to dry, I'm going to add a mustache just by making some little lines down here that end in a point on both sides. So character cookies like this do take a bit longer to make, but they're super cute and really are the star of the show when you add them to your cookie sets. So it's always fun to add 1 or 2 to any set that you do. And here you can see my line went kind of down where I didn't want it to go. That one mustache hair was really kind of crazy. So I just used my scribe to clean it away. And then I was brushing away the excess icing with a damp paintbrush, and my icing underneath was still wet. And now I created a big dent, so I wanted to show you how I fixed that. So I'm just going to take my icing and pipe right into that hole. And because my icing is not dry all the way, I am able to gently wiggle it with my scribe and get it to all come together and settle back down. Once it's completely dry, you'll hardly know that I ever made a mistake here in the first place. However, if your icing is already too dry to fix it like this, you can let it dry completely and then use some food grade glycerin mixed with some stiffer royal icing and just paint it right in there and paint over the entire arm, and you'll be able to fix it and nobody will ever know. I have videos on that and I'll link it in the description. So while I was fixing all that, my mustache had a chance to dry, so I'm just going to come back in and add a nose. I don't have any skin tone icing made, so I'm just going to use white, and once it's dried, I'll paint over it with a flesh tone. To make my paint, I'm just going to mix ivory with white and a little dab of pink and mix those gel food colors together along with some food grade glycerin, and then I'll just be able to paint right over his nose, and I'll do the same thing for his hands. Now I'll grab my detail consistency orange icing and just add a little buckle here to his hat. Isn't that cute? And then let's add a little shamrock down here at the ball of his hat. So just take your green royal icing and make 2 balls and drag them down to a point, and then continue doing that all the way around. And I should have left it right here, but I went back and decided to make it more of a flower. And so I did the same thing right on top of that once it had dried. And then I have some royal icing transfer shamrocks that I made in a different video, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. And I'm just going to put some icing on the back of it. I usually use whatever icing is the background color and stick that right down on my cookie. I probably should have waited a little while longer because his nose wasn't fully dry yet. And now I'm just going to go ahead and pipe some little mitten hands on top of this so it looks like he is holding on to it. And it's moving around a little bit because I didn't press it down very hard because his nose is wet. So I need to be careful here so that I don't mess up his nose too much and it doesn't move around and crack the icing that I'm now putting down for his hands. So you want to wait until your cookie is dry before you apply your royal icing transfers. So this is an instance of do as I say and not as I do. Yes, Mom. Did you see the eye roll there? Anyway, I piped 2 mitten hands and I used my scribe to help shape and settle that icing down. And then this cookie is done with the exception of painting his nose and hands. I think he's super cute. And I love this City Gnome cookie cutter. So again, you can get that on my website. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And if cookie decorating is something you're interested in, please hit that like and subscribe button. And until next time, happy cooking!